go further. Ronnie, say something. Ronnie, yeah. On the alliance politics thing, I think what we've got to realise is that
that's Dominic Berry.
The party that we have in political power in this country and the policies of whichever party that is does impact really quite heavily on what we're trying to do in terms of promoting veganism and in terms of promoting animal protection. And going back to the budget goal, the vast majority of people in this country are opposed to the budget goal, but because we have a government in power that is pro-keeping wildlife, that makes not a shred of difference, and that goal has gone on and continued. And the thing is, if ever we're going to replace the type of governments we've had that in general have been opposed to veganism and in general opposed to animal protection, such as the Conservative government, also the Labour government, which brought in draconian legislation against anti-vivisectionists, for instance. We're going to have, in order to get a decent party in power, in order to have a decent political system in this country, the only way that we're going to do that is in alliance with other people that have radical views and in alliance with other people of the left. Because we will not get a decent government in power in this country just through our own movement, just through the vegan movement and the animal protection movement. It has to be broader than that. And that's another very important reason for being in alliance with left-wing groups or other groups in order to bring that situation about. So it's not just about, it's not just about kind of politics in general, it's about, politics in a specific way in terms of electing a decent government in this country, or even a half-decent government, which would be half as good as what we've got at the moment. That's one thing. The other thing is about the revaccination aspect. There are people that campaign on single issues. You have people that focus almost entirely on vivisection. There are people at the moment focusing entirely on the badger cull. And as Roger said, the badger cull is it offers us, although it's obviously a terrible thing, the fact that that's taking place offers us a huge opportunity to promote veganism, because the badger cull is going on because of the dairy industry. Certainly where I'm from Worcestershire, quite a long way, but where I am, we have promoted veganism hugely on the basis of the badger cull. We've been in the media, the newspapers, on the radio quite frequently because of the badger cull, because we've been asked to, as a group that stands for animal protection, we've been asked to comment on the badger cull, to do interviews about the badger cull, but all the time in those things we push veganism. Obviously we've spoken about why the badger cull's wrong in terms of what's happened to the badger, but we've also said that the cull has nothing to do with love of cows or concern for cows, because the number of cows that are killed because of bovine TB is only a tiny or very small percentage of the number of cows that are slaughtered every year for other reasons. And to get people to look at it that way. And so we have really used that in a big way. I think groups in other parts of the country that are promoting veganism need to do that, because it's a really good opportunity to use that, to promote veganism. And I also think that what I try to do is, sometimes it can be very difficult to get people not as being focused on single issues. And what I'm trying to do is to somehow get them to incorporate veganism into that. For instance, there was every year we have so-called World Day for Animals and Laboratories. You probably know about that. There's a march every year. There was one in where was it this year? Oxford this year. Now, the one last year was in Birmingham, and I was asked by the chap that was organising it if I would help him. So I didn't say, oh no, I won't help you because it's a single issue you're talking about. I'm just talking about vivisection. I said yes, I would help him. And the reason I wanted to help him was because I wanted to try and put a go vegan aspect into that, to insert that into that. So, because normally when leaflets and stuff are produced for that event, they just talk about vivisection. And they don't even really talk about what ordinary people can do about vivisection, just facts and things about it, and that's it. So the idea was, when we did the leaflet on page 2, was to have a paragraph in that saying, vivisection is not the only way in which animals are abused, slaughtered, and persecuted. This happens in other ways, and you can find information about that, including information about veganism. And I kind of was able to get that into the material that was being distributed. And I think really that should happen with all campaigns. And what we need to do is get all campaigns on whatever area. Another thing where that's happened is we did a campaign against the greyhound racing industry. And I've actually got them to put something in their leaflets that will guide people to it. Because on the street store, in the street store, it's easy. Can you do a street store that looks like it's on a single issue? I mean, I'm a big project about having where you've got to go vegan, and I think it's good to have that. And I think people are not frightened of that, or certainly people are not as frightened of that as a lot of people think. But where people are doing stills on what might appear to be single issues, such as against vivisection or fur trade, or even something against the badger cup, you can have stuff on that still about veganism and make sure everyone that comes up to that store gets that material. So get guidance. And it's more difficult on a demonstration you can see in leaflets. And that's why in leaflets where people pick up campaign on other issues, I think all that material should have something in it where people get guidance towards veganism by reading that.
So is that your question then?
But I was going to say, what I've said now, what do you think about that?
I agree with the single issue. I tried in Ireland to what I call abolitionize single issues. And of course, the person who criticises single issues more than most probably would be Guy Francis. Although ironically, he's got his own single issue. Although he says that they're not single issues. What he really says is that because he's Gary Francione, he can abolitionise his single issue, and in other words, place it in the context of animal rights and veganism. Now that's all we need to do. So, for example, when we there's a group called Calibration, and when we did a circus thing, we had Go Vegan signs, Go Vegan for all the animals signs, and they were getting peeps from the cars as much as anything else. So you don't have to do that. The problem is that we try to abolitionize a live export campaign, and I noticed on Facebook there is a group called Vegans Against Live Export. Because in some senses vegans should be kind of against all of that, because vegans are campaigning against everything 24/7 just by being vegan. Now I know that's going to be an issue that's going to come up in the workshop about that's not enough, but the thing is, from an animal rights point of view, we're opposed to animal use. The difference between animal rights and animal welfare is that welfare is about treatment, rights is about use. We think that animals have got rights, and that what we do to them are rights violations. So we're opposed to using them Now, in the circus or in vivisection or in live exports, that's a form of animal use, and so therefore we're bound to be against it. But we, as vegans and animal rights people who read or are aware and familiar with the philosophy of animal rights, we will contextualize it. In the same way as someone might say, well, there's some issue here with X human population. Some people come along and say, well, there's an issue wider than that. So that's our job, is to contextualize it. I try to do that with the live exports, and unfortunately, what people then do is they will trot along and they will pick every poster and banner apart from the vegan ones. Thinking, oh, well, this is the live export thing. Not quite seeing the context themselves. And I think that's the thing that's got to change within the movement. We've got to change that. Going back to the politics thing. First of all, the alliance politics is really talking about us making alliance with other social movements rather than politics per se. Now, the people who are not, I've got a pretty cynical view of politicians. I'm of that opinion that if you want to be a politician, then you shouldn't be allowed to be one. There's something wrong with that. But also, I tend to see politicians as followers rather than leaders. They present themselves as leaders, but really they follow trends because they're after the votes and they're after the money usually. Well, it's usually the way around, the money and the votes. But they want to get those things. So my suggestion is that we need to bring about cultural change. Once we've got cultural change, political change will follow. Now, I know that Ronnie just differs with me a little bit on that. I'm interested in kind of green politics and this kind of stuff. Which is fair enough, but certainly in terms of right now, we're not going to get much from politicians. Look at the hunting ban. You can't get animal rights from politicians. You can get animal welfare sometimes. It doesn't usually work. It takes millions of years to come in. But you can never get animal rights from politicians because it's asking for too much. If we want animal rights, we've got to do it culturally. We've got to bring about enough people who want it. And the good news about that is that some theories of social change suggest that you only need a fairly small percentage of people who are committed to an idea. It could be as low as 10%, which is probably a little bit too low. But 15–20% of people, if they're committed to an idea, they can bring about a lot of change. Because I can tell you as a sociologist, most people in society are conformists. We conform to the norms and values of society. Nobody here is in their swimsuit. Everybody comes dressed appropriately. You don't know what's going on underneath there. I say that in my first year classes. Everybody's arrived at the lecture, including me. I've got my notes. They've got their notepads, or nowadays their iPads and all the rest of it, because they know what it means to be a student. So there's a social construction of that situation. So we are social animals. We know what to do. In that sense. So I think that we can bring about some change, and that will then change politics. I'm not convinced that going to politics now is a good use of resources. In fact, I think that the history of the movement suggests it's been a bad use of resources because you don't get much anyway. And also it can be reneged because if you don't change the culture, you're going to get somebody trying to repeal the hunting ban. Or something, oh, we've done this, but they're going to try and roll back on it. The hunters have found every loophole in the world to be able to carry on hunting. The same goes with Ireland. The stag hunt got banned. Everything else is still legal. The stag hunt got banned, but they're still hunting. They find loopholes because we haven't changed the culture. We haven't won any arguments. And I always argue that I was involved with the anti-hunting campaign in the 80s. Did radio things, TV things, all kinds of stuff. And animal rights was never talked about. It was always about things like animal welfare, pest control, vermin control, those kind of issues. The idea of animals having rights wasn't really part of it because it was led by the League Against Cruel Sport. I remember a time when the leader of the League Against Cruel Sports at the time was trying to get the spokesperson for the Hunt Amateurs to take her fishing as a blood sports badge off because it was an embarrassment to them. We were on the telly at the time. And we were saying, if you're on the calendar at the time, we were saying, no, keep it on there. If they ask you about fishers, then the Hunt Amateurs have got a policy. if it's difficult for Dick Course and the League, let them sort that out. That's not our problem. Let them sort it out, you know. But politics is about, you know, compromise more or less, and you don't get much. So I think if you're going to go anywhere, maybe the Green Party, but I certainly think that the focus on the money should be on public education, not, you know, trying to, you know, do anything like, you know, taking sleazy politicians for meals or anything like that. So I'm a bit cynical about mainstream politics.
I agree that you have to, if you want people to vote the right way, you have to educate those people. I think the problem we've got though is that we have governments that do things despite the majority view, because that majority view has no political power. This is a problem. There was 1 million people marched in London against the invasion of Iraq. The Labour Party still did that. You know, the vast majority of people, like we've got a sort of hunting ban, it's not a proper hunting ban, but for decades and decades and decades, we've had huge majorities of the population opposed to protocols.
Well, I think the issue you raised there, though, is a wide one. It's about why people are so passive and stuff.
Yeah, but you see, people can still be passive, and because all you're wanting people to do is put a cross on a piece of paper in the right place. That's all you're asking them to do. And if enough people put a cross on a piece of paper in the right place, we could have a government that, although it may not be perfect, would be so much better for animal protection and so much better for the promotion of veganism than the government we've got at the moment. And this is the thing, that it's not enough for people to be against something if they have no political power to enforce their view. And it's about not, so if you change people and if you turn people into vegans, that in itself obviously reduces animal abuse, because there isn't the demand from those people for animal products. But all the people that don't care about animals and still want to carry on doing all the nasty things to them would still carry on doing that, because you wouldn't have the political force to stop them, you see. And my view is that if we're going to, when is it we start building the political movement? Do we wait until we have a certain percentage of vegans and then say, okay, right now we'll go into politics? Or do we kind of start doing that now? And my view is that although I think, with myself, I'm involved in politics, but I'd say that only takes up perhaps 10% of my time, and 90% of my time is taken up with vegan education.
Feed the cats?
Yeah, and feeding the cats. Mark vegan. But because you're not going to get the right politics. So in theory, we could have a government elected in this country with just 20% of the population voting for that government. That's all we need.
Yeah, well, I think one problem with that march is the fact that it was a one-day march and the politicians would do then. They don't think it goes back to normal. If those people, stop working or doing something else. I thought you were bored point. I've got a sociological answer to it, but I was just wondering whether anybody else wants to say anything rather than.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about alliance politics on just a simply personal level. As a new vegan, I've noticed that, for instance, take an example. We went to a cafe, they do all kinds of wraps and things, and we asked the guy if he had vegan cheese. And because he'd never heard of it, he was suddenly in this intellectual space where he had no reference point, and that threatened him, and he felt defensive. And so he kind of clutched at straws and said, "There's no such fucking thing." So, excuse my language. You can't have vegan cheese. It's not dairy. And was quite. It came across as aggressive, but it was actually just a threat because he had no reference point. And of course that put us off eating. This is a bit of a bombshell. In terms of making political alliances, literally the way we introduce people to things, and the language, it's almost like it's a language of conscience, okay? Encouraging people to inform themselves and to follow their own conscience is almost like it's underneath abolitionism and veganism and politics as well. You know, the way our politics is structured is you vote with party politics rather than conscience politics. You know, and for me that is a deeper issue than both politics and veganism. That if we can encourage by our language and by concerns about making culture, these wonderful studies that the guy came up with recently, I forgot, the mammalian study, where emotions, the dog was wired out ECG, same emotions as a human. So there's good science. Yeah. There's good science revealing to us things that we ought to be changing our paradigms about the way, but because there's no incentive to follow your conscience.
That first example you gave is almost like a supply and demand issue. And in some senses, I mean, although the guy was defensive, that's what we're like that, you know. I got a chapter in my PhD about denial. We're very good at denial, you know. And one of the ways is to be aggressive to something, because as you say, you put them into an uncomfortable space. And sociologically, people are very conservative about food, you know. And you put them in that thing he didn't know what to do, and so he's very. But you also planted a seed. You know, so in some senses, what's needed now is for other people to go and ask the same question of the same guy, you know, because he won't react the same all the time, you know. And like Donald Watson, co-founder, most well-known co-founder of the Vegan Society in 1944, he had this great phrase which I adhere to a lot. It's called ripening up. He says you don't wait for a new idea just to magically appear in people's heads. You've got to ripen them up to a new idea, which means you've got to get in their faces to some extent and just give them that new terminology, you know. And once they start laughing and all that, you know, and LOL on Facebook, then they can think about it, you know. A good example of that would be Peter Singer, almost in the first page of Animal Liberation in 1975, not Animal Rights book by the way, but in the first page of Animal Liberation, he kind of almost apologized for using the phrase animal liberation. And he said, this will seem to be a parody of human liberation. You know, now the phrase is not going to make people react, you know, because they've been ripened up to it, you know. And so if you've got a new idea, and if you've got an idea that challenges, and if you've got a paradigm shifting idea, then you've got to ripen people up to it. And that's a gradual process. So even with that one individual, what that person needs to do is have that experience more than once, you know, and then eventually they'll go, I'm going to have to check this out, even if it's only from a supply and demand point of view, you know. And so from that point of view, I would have thought that you probably planted the very first seed that created that defensive reaction, and what you need now is to try and see if you can do it again with other people doing it, and then hopefully the guys are going to go, I better check this out, you know, there's something going on. And in fact, that's what somebody gave a talk in Dublin recently and said that that's one of the ways that they get restaurants to change is by getting a lot of people asking for things, you know, asking for vegan options. Going in and saying, got any vegan options? No, oh sorry about that. And then you get, but the more people do that, the better. We're not out of time? 2 minutes. Okay. Excuse me.
Can I just sort of echo that point just very quickly? It is about asking, because recently we went to Carlucci in Lincoln and asked about vegan wines. The manager didn't know that wine wouldn't be vegan. She didn't know what was used in defining. She says, great, I'll find out.
Send it down to Marks and Spencer's.
Yes, the M&S is definitely better as well. But she was going to let us bring her own wine, but she researched it, contacted her suppliers, and all but 2 wines from the deli and in the restaurant are vegan. She gave us that assurance and gave me a list. And they have a dedicated vegan menu. It's not extensive, but at least they're making an effort. Yeah. And we've been, this year we've been to Glasgow. There's 4 practically 100% vegan places to eat and drink there. There's at least 2 in Edinburgh. There's at least 2 in Liverpool. You can get vegan ale in Liverpool and in Glasgow as well, vegan cask ale. Yeah. So I think it's definitely improving. in terms of the food, in terms of trying to influence in subtle ways your friends, your colleagues, your family. That's a nut which is hard to crack, and I think we've all struggled with it in our own ways. And it's just
But the weird thing is that those things are connected, because I think you did right. I think it's a really important point. You know, this ripening up, is important because eventually people will get it. And I think as vegans, we should, in some senses, forgive people for being ignorant about it.
Yeah.
Because it's not her fault. She didn't know. I mean, nobody's going to educate her on that. The mainstream is not going to do that. So we've got to do that education. But if we do that, and then you can go to restaurants and you can go to bars and you can get this and get that. It's more prevalent.
Yeah.
That's what's going to cause the mainstream to shift, because people are conservative about their food, but they're also lazy and they're also conformist. So if most things were vegan, they'd mostly eat vegan.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. That was the answer to Ronnie before, because there are some people, I used to call them militant meat eaters, but there are some people who go, I'm going to carry on hunting no matter what, blah, 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 and all that kind of. We know there's people like that, but there's also a lot of people in the middle who are just going along, and they go to McDonald's because everybody goes to McDonald's. There was a talk in Luxembourg, and the one good thing of the talk is the guy said that, why do people eat meat? And the answer to that is, why do most people eat meat? And the answer to that might be because most people eat meat. We are conformists. We tend not to like to think of ourselves as conformists, but sociologically we are conformists. We conform to hundreds of rules every day. When we drive, when we cross roads, everything, dress and all those things. We are conformists because we're good social animals. But when it becomes easier and easier to be vegan, it's a numbers thing. I've said I've got an essay online where I think it's called Hello Donald, which is hello to you, Donald Watson, because you are also pioneers. I'm putting that there. The real pioneers were Donald Watson, 1944, but we are still pioneers. And the better that we do as being pioneers, the easier it is for the next generation of vegans. And it's going to be a numbers game in that sense. We better go.